Welcome back to College Football Addiction. That is TJ Pittenger over there. I'm Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12. And I want to put TJ on the hot seat on his own show for a second to talk expansion and realignment. Now, this is something that TJ, I think, last season was blowing up. Everybody wanted to talk about Florida State and Clemson. This year, it's been more of these rogue Twitter accounts or rogue podcasters or YouTubers just blowing hot air up everybody's skirts. And you and I have done our very best to break down these rumors in a way that's informational and gives people what they need to know moving forward. The latest edition of this, I was reading a tweet, I texted it to you, we decided, you know what, we got to talk about it. At Inside the Big 12 says, Clemson and Florida State would need to notify the ACC they're leaving after the conclusion of the 2025-2026 season, and they will by August of 2025. So the claim here from our news-breaking friend on Twitter is that Florida State and Clemson, by the end of this summer, will let the world know they are exiting the ACC and will be elsewhere after that 2025-2026 season, completely blowing out that 2030 deadline we originally had. Is this going to happen? Is Florida State going to leave the ACC in the next few months?
I would be pretty surprised, right? And I know Florida State fans, Clemson fans, kind of felt like, oh, it's a half win, right? It's a compromise. It's the literal definition of a compromise when we got the news on the 2030 kind of timeline being a little bit easier. Yeah. But I would be pretty surprised. I won't say that it's impossible. You can make a realignment projection today, and by tomorrow you're thinking something completely different because of how quick some of this stuff can move. I would be pretty surprised. It would surprise me if Florida State and Clemson had the appetite. Like we've talked about how much it would cost, right? $75 million at the 2030 year time frame. You're going to have to add $18 million a year every year behind that. So if you leave 4 years earlier, what are you looking at? Essentially like another 80 million, 80 minus 8, so 72 million. You're talking about $147 million if my math's pretty good there, 150. I don't necessarily know that I see them having the appetite to do that. Does the SEC or does the Big Ten make a move with just 3-ish years to go on a media deal for the Big Ten, a few more for the SEC? I don't know what the appetite is for those conferences to do it. Now, are there some angles that would maybe be interesting with that? Would the Big Ten maybe pay up a couple of years early to keep FSU and Clemson from landing in the SEC? Or because that is what feels a little more natural, right? The ESPN is going to want to keep properties. And so whether the SEC wants it or not, would maybe Fox say like, hey, this is our chance to steal them? Maybe. I'm not saying that I completely buy that that's the case. Could Florida State and Clemson go in for a few years on a lessened deal, a half share or a 3/4 share like you've seen other teams do in the Big Ten, but it secures their future and also makes up some of the money that you're getting because of the playoff and other things that you kind of make up the difference of what you're making in the ACC? If you're Florida State and Clemson, the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten is big right now. But with the increased revenue sharing, it's not that much. You're talking like $10 to $15 million a year instead of the $40 million a year that you were probably looking at. And so if you're Florida State and Clemson, does it make sense to leave right now? Because you're talking about a gap that you're trying to close, but then you have to add $18 million a year on top of it to leave even earlier. So I don't know that it would make a ton of sense. Florida State in the middle of some building projects right now. I don't know that either one of them has $147 million to pony up tomorrow to leave before the 26th season. They have fully agreed that those are the numbers in question, and that is what they are going to pay if they leave. There's no lawsuit anymore to try and get that number down even lower. Now, do they have to pay that all at one time? Can they pay that over the course of, from now until 2036? I don't know the answer to that. I would lean toward no, but obviously as a Florida State guy, I hope this Twitter insider is right.
So the biggest question for me, I look at a BYU who comes from the mid-major ranks and goes to the Big 12. It's less of a jump from mid-major to from the ACC, I should say, to like the Big 10 of the SEC. It's not like jumping from mid-major to the Power 4, but it's still significant. $20 million plus a year when you do that. Is that investment enough to get Clemson and Florida State to pay up early on and say, hey, look, if we're getting 20, 25 million more per year, we're going to make this thing back up in 5, 6, 7, if you take into account your athletic revenue as well as your expenses, maybe 10 years. That's a 10-year investment I think I make.
Yeah, I mean, it literally just, to me, That side of it, the Florida State Clemson side is very easy. It is, here's how much money we will bring in. Here's how much money we would bring in. Here's our, here's the little bit of a cost to leave. Here's what we'll make in, you think about ticket sales. How much better does a Florida State Tennessee sell than a Florida State Wake? Right? How much better does a Florida State South Carolina sell than a Florida State Boston College? Right? Now, Florida State Clemson and Florida State Miami, Florida State Virginia Tech, those are going to be high ticket dollar, ideas anyway. But yeah, like I think that's kind of what you're looking at. How much better does a Florida State Nebraska sell than a Florida State Syracuse, right? So I think you're factoring all those things in. So on the Florida State Clemson side, it's a very easy math equation. Money in, money out, money cost, money spent, money delivered, right? That's easy. The other side of it is what's tougher. Where do we go? Do we get a full share? Is the Big Ten and the SEC, are they willing to do something 3 or 4 years before we kind of thought that we would have a timeline of moving things around? Does the SEC see enough value? Does the Big Ten see enough value to do it early? Like, where's Florida State and Clemson going to go in the next 4 years? Like, they're not going to go independent for 3 years and then go on because they're getting an unequal revenue sharing right now in the ACC. Does the unequal revenue sharing kind of, does it cut enough of that gap to where, does it cut enough of a gap to where it's worth it to maybe stick around for a couple of years and not have to pay an additional $18 million per season? I don't know. That's on Florida State and Clemson to try and figure out from a number side. The tough side is, where do they land? Who's willing to take them right now? Will they have a spot before 2030? And for Florida State and Clemson, again, their side's easy. The hard part to me is thinking that the Big Ten will do this 3 years early. I could see the Big Ten doing this a year early. I could see them saying like, hey, we'll take you in 2029. Yeah. That way the SEC can't get you. ESPN can't keep you, and we'll give you a little more stability. But I don't know that I could see them doing it in 4 years because, well, what leverage does Florida State and Clemson have to get in somewhere early anyway?
TJ, before I exonerate you from your own show, before I close your own show, it's 2032. You wake up in your bed, real snug, there's a rooster outside crowing, and Florida State is still in the ACC. What is your disappointment level? Because there's probably a Wake Forest fan listening saying, oh, these guys are only talking about Florida State Clemson leaving. They could still stay. What is your disappointment level if it's 2032, you wake up and Florida State's still here?
I mean, I think it's pretty high. However, it's hard to know what factors went into that, right? It's hard to know what has happened since then. I'll tell you, if I've got my 2025 mind in 2032, it's pretty high. There's no doubt about it. Florida State has not liked the ACC for a long time, and it goes back a lot further than 2023 when they sued to leave. And so, yeah, the disappointment level is very, very high. That said, what does college football look like in totality at that point? And that's kind of the unanswered question that we don't know. What has changed? What has realigned? What has just been very different? Now, obviously, if Clemson's out and Georgia Tech's out and UNC's out and all these other teams are out, then yeah, it's going to be pretty insane. But has the ACC shifted? Has they changed? Have they just had an absolute, revitalization where Florida State, Clemson, and Miami and maybe one other program are consistently competing for titles and the money has gone up and success has raised? I'm not anticipating that. I'm not expecting that. But if that's the case, then maybe you're looking at it a little bit differently. But yeah, I'd say that if all things kind of stay the course and we get to 2032 and something cataclysmic has not happened to, change our minds, I think there'd be a pretty big level of disappointment.
TJ, where can folks find more of your work?
Yeah, so if you're watching this on Drake's channel, over at College Football Addiction, if you're watching on College Football Addiction and you haven't hit the subscribe button already, make sure that you hit that button. What about you?
Before I close, everything that I want to double down on everything, pretty much everything you said here. I don't believe this will occur within the next year. It's something we can toss around and talk about the possibility of it, because if it does, it wouldn't be the most stunning thing that's happened in realignment and expansion. You could argue Texas and Oklahoma or Stanford and Cal to the ACC. Those moves were even bigger than Florida State leaving because we know they're already kind of teeing this thing up. So I'm not worried right now about this happening in the next 4 months, 5 months, us learning that, even in the next 2 years. But it's still very much a possibility, especially with donors at Florida State or Clemson feeling a little angsty toward the ACC or wanting to place themselves in the SEC or the Big Ten if that window feels as though it's closing, or either of those conferences put any pressure on the schools to make a decision. if in that scenario we see that. Oh, you got to, have I
Yeah,
sparked the pod? Here we go.
Yeah, we ain't going too fast. Florida State and Clemson here. This is free for both athletic departments, both marketing teams. If you're watching this, share this with your the hires up as your school and stuff. They should both start funds immediately. And it should just literally be the get out of the ACC fund. And if it gets to $75 million raised by 2030, that's when you're out. But if you get to $93 million by the year before, you can leave a year earlier. If you get to what would that be? $115 million the year before, or $113 million the year before, we'll be out a couple of years earlier. Whatever you want to raise, whatever your fan base wants bad enough, is what we can do. That's what they should do immediately. Those funds should already be in existence. It should literally be called the Get Out of the ACC Fund. And once you hit certain thresholds, if you raise 150 of it tomorrow, you're out tomorrow. See ya. And so, yeah, Florida State, Clemson folks listening, that should already have been done. But since you haven't started those funds yet, I'm giving you the free game. I won't even charge a royalty for you starting those.
At Drake C. Toll, at LO Big 12 on Twitter, and wherever you find your podcast with Locked On Big 12. Thanks, TJ.
Appreciate you, man.